Tomorrow marks 1 year since Donald Trump re-entered the White House, and all this week we'll be delving into various aspects of his presidency at this moment.
Tonight, congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins looks at his expansion of presidential power and how it's testing Congress and the system of checks and balances rooted in the Constitution.
The second Trump White House is a blitz of executive actions.
What we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. We're terminating those programs, and they're going to be terminated on a permanent basis.
And use of the military and federal authorities in American cities and abroad.
All political and military figures in Venezuela should understand.
Hello and welcome, guys, to Dr. John Podcast. So let's get started. Trump has spent years projecting an image of superhuman fitness, flawless decisions, unmatched acuity, peak stamina, and built his entire political brand around demanding people accept it regardless of what the documented evidence actually shows. But while Trump has been busy constructing this carefully curated narrative,
What happened to Maduro can happen to them.
A forceful display of power that often leaves Congress sidelined.
I think it's important to send the message.
And trying to weigh in. Like last week, when these senators met with a minister from Greenland whose country Trump wants to take over. I asked about their power.
Every day we should be thinking if we are fully asserting our authorities under the Constitution.
Is Congress right now?
No.
Some days, no.
Yeah. Congress has abdicated its power largely. I'd say it's the seventh inning. We're behind 4-3, but the game isn't over.
The big, long picture here, over the 20th century, into these years of Trump, is a loss of congressional power.
Sarah Binder is a professor at George Washington University focused on Congress.
of presidential invincibility, something remarkable has been taking shape in the halls of Congress, something that cuts through the noise and the spin and the counterattacks, something that represents a direct constitutional challenge to everything Trump claims about his own fitness. House Democrats, led by Representative Jamie Raskin, have introduced legislation that would fundamentally alter the balance of power when it comes to presidential accountability. They've put forward a bill that creates a formal, congressionally authorized commission.
She points to how Congress grew and crises like the Great Depression and World Wars, leading to Congress giving more power to past presidents. But now there's another factor.
We're in a world of high, intense partisanship, polarization, which means that the loyalties of members of Congress are quite often more to the president of their party than to their responsibilities as lawmakers.
Add to a Congress driven by party loyalty, a president who uses social media to threaten those in Congress who oppose him.
This president thinks he has no need for Congress.
The Constitution starts with Congress. It is Article 1, and it is twice as long as Article 2, which covers the president. Democratic lawmakers especially point this out.
With the explicit power to evaluate whether a sitting president is physically or mentally capable of performing the duties of the office. And if that commission determines the president cannot discharge those duties, the 25th Amendment kicks in. The vice president takes over. The president is removed from power. This isn't a symbolic resolution. This isn't a strongly worded letter.
I actually take the view that Congress has Article 1 powers, and the founders intended Congress to be the more powerful branch of government.
We spoke with 71 current members of Congress for this story. The vast majority, members of both parties, bemoaned what they see as a long-term loss of power for Congress. Some see it now as at historic lows.
But in our hallway conversations, we heard resignation. Few members felt responsible for or talked of tackling the problem. We asked Republican Ryan Zinke, who served as cabinet secretary in Trump's first term and now is a House member for Montana.
Congress, over the years, has let loose a lot of their power, primarily power of the purse.
But next we asked him about Trump specifically, how he has sent the National Guard to states and cities uninvited, renamed the congressionally established Kennedy Center after himself, and ripped up congressional spending plans, dismantling agencies like USAID.
This is a legislative mechanism designed to operationalize constitutional provisions that have existed on paper for decades but have never been activated because the institutional machinery was never built until now. Let me walk you through the specifics of the Raskin bill because the details reveal just how carefully this mechanism has been constructed. We're talking about a 10-page piece of legislation that establishes a 17-member commission on presidential capacity. This isn't some vague advisory panel. This is a body with real authority, real expertise.
Zinke then defended the president.
Fraud, waste, and abuse is never congressional intent. And the president is within his authority to remove and stop funding of fraud, waste, and abuse. So,
But he removed entire agencies, USAID, that were established by Congress to be independent.
well, but also was it in the best interest of the United States, and did it follow and support U.S. policy?
But my question is, Congress hasn't weighed in on that at all.
Well, I would say the president is within his constitutional right to make sure we don't have fraud, waste, and abuse, and taxpayer dollars are spent wisely.
That is broad leeway, which Trump also is getting in Venezuela, with Republican senators last week providing just enough votes to bat down an attempt to limit his powers there.
And the point of order is sustained.
Which brings us back to Greenland and Denmark, where protests about the U.S. are rising and where senators visited this weekend. But it was mostly Democrats, and it's not clear what they will do about the president's threats.
One of the things that's been made clear to us is that the people of Denmark are very anxious, are quite concerned, and the people of Greenland even more so.
And real constitutional backing. The commission would be composed of physicians, actual medical doctors with the training and experience to evaluate cognitive function and physical health. It would also include former senior executive branch officials, people who understand the demands of high office because they've worked inside the administration themselves. These aren't political operatives or partisan activists. These are professionals selected specifically because their expertise is relevant to the question at hand.
Hovering what seems a basic question. Doesn't Trump need congressional approval to act to send a military force to Greenland? I asked House Speaker Mike Johnson this earlier this month. He said maybe, but maybe not.
Under Article 2, as we talked about in the room, the president has broad authority as the commander-in-chief.
But why
as
Greenland?
all previous presidents have.
Democratic Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth, a combat veteran, responded.
I strongly disagree with him. That is absolutely not what the Constitution says. But in fact, it is where Republicans are. They have basically given their powers over to the White House.
President Trump has been running the table on the legislative branch for 2 terms now in a row.
Jamil Jaffer is a law and national security professor at George Mason University and a Republican. He sees Trump as within the norm so far in terms of military action overseas, but he sees unique imbalance in power otherwise.
These are really interesting and perhaps dangerous times. An overly assertive executive without any constraint by Congress, with limited constraints by the court. We've seen how that operates in other countries. We haven't seen that here historically in America.
Can the president do the job? The appointment process adds another layer of institutional legitimacy. Commission members wouldn't be selected by any single person or party. They would be appointed by bipartisan congressional leadership, meaning both Republicans and Democrats would have a hand in choosing who serves. This design prevents the commission from being dismissed as a purely partisan attack mechanism. When members of both parties participate in the selection process, the resulting body carries a credibility that purely Democratic appointments could never achieve.
Republicans are divided on the arc of power.
Look, I think the balance is where it's always been. We have the appropriations process that is a check and balance.
In general, in terms of our balance of powers, it's not very balanced anymore. Mainly because Congress has willingly, over the decades, given up constitutional authority.
While Democrats see them as throwing away power right now.
As it pertains to President Trump, it is unprecedented. There is virtually no pushback whatsoever.
Congress overall recognizes, but has yet to reckon with, the situation. The first branch in the Constitution is often a second thought in critical decisions for the country and the world. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
And once constituted, the commission would have specific powers, the authority to conduct medical examinations, the ability to gather evidence, and critically, the power to issue a public finding on whether the president remains able to serve. That public finding would carry enormous weight, both politically and constitutionally. Now, to understand why this bill represents such a dramatic development, you need to understand the constitutional framework it's designed to activate. The 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution contains a provision, Section 4, that has been sitting dormant since its ratification. That section allows for the removal of a president who is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. The traditional mechanism for triggering Section 4 relies on the vice president and a majority of the cabinet making that determination. But the amendment also contains a crucial alternative pathway. It specifically states that Congress may, by law, provide for some other body to make that determination instead of the cabinet. The framers of the amendment anticipated that there might be situations where the cabinet, for reasons of political loyalty or institutional pressure, would be unable or unwilling to act even when action was clearly warranted. So they built in a backup plan. They gave Congress the authority to create an alternative body, and for decades, Congress never exercised that authority. The backup plan remained theoretical. The Raskin bill changes that. It finally builds the institutional mechanism that the 25th Amendment always envisioned. Think about what this means in practical terms. Under the existing cabinet-based process, removing a president requires the vice president, the person who ran on the same ticket and shares the same political fortunes, to turn against the president. It requires a majority of cabinet secretaries, all of whom were appointed by that president and serve at his pleasure, to collectively decide he can no longer govern. The political dynamics of such a decision are almost insurmountable. Cabinet members owe their positions to the president. They share his policy agenda. They're connected to his political network. The personal and professional costs of breaking ranks are enormous. History has shown that this combination of loyalty and self-interest makes cabinet-driven removal essentially impossible, regardless of how serious the concerns about presidential fitness might be. The Raskin Commission bypasses these dynamics entirely. By creating an independent body of medical professionals and former officials appointed through a bipartisan process, the bill establishes a mechanism that doesn't depend on political loyalty. The commission members wouldn't owe their positions to the president. They wouldn't share his electoral fortunes. They could evaluate fitness based on evidence and expertise rather than political calculation. This is precisely what the framers of the 25th Amendment anticipated when they included the other body language. They understood that the cabinet mechanism might fail precisely when it was most needed. They created a constitutional off-ramp for Congress to build something better. The Raskin bill finally takes that off-ramp. The bill has already attracted substantial legislative support, with roughly 50 Democratic co-sponsors signing on. 50 members of Congress putting their names behind a mechanism to evaluate presidential fitness is not a trivial number. It represents a significant block of the Democratic caucus committing to this constitutional accountability approach. And the bill's framing is particularly noteworthy. It's explicitly presented as a response to Trump's recent threats and behavior. The legislation isn't described as an abstract constitutional exercise or a theoretical safeguard against hypothetical future presidents. It's tied directly to documented conduct by the current occupant of the Oval Office. The lawmakers behind this bill are saying, in effect, that Trump's specific actions have created the urgency for this mechanism. They're not waiting for a future crisis. They're responding to what they see as a present one. Now let me tell you about the specific conduct that has galvanized this legislative effort because it provides essential context for understanding why the bill is gaining momentum right now. Trump issued threats against Iran that crossed lines that American presidents simply do not cross. We're talking about language threatening to bomb civilian infrastructure, to destroy cultural sites, to unleash devastation on a scale that international humanitarian law explicitly prohibits. The rhetoric wasn't just aggressive, it was apocalyptic. He used phrases like, "A whole civilization will die tonight." He framed military action in terms of annihilation rather than strategic objectives. This isn't how American presidents talk about the use of military force. This isn't how commanders-in-chief communicate about matters of war and peace. The threats prompted prompted immediate international condemnation, raised serious questions about compliance with the laws of armed conflict, and triggered alarm among lawmakers who began asking a question that should never need to be asked. Is the president stable enough to control the most powerful military in human history? More than 80 Democratic lawmakers have now publicly stated that Trump's behavior demonstrates he can no longer safely perform the job of president. 80 lawmakers. That's a substantial portion of the Democratic caucus reaching the same conclusion based on observable conduct. They've described his threats as genocidal in nature. They've pointed to specific language that suggests a willingness to commit acts that would constitute war crimes under international law. And they've connected this behavior directly to the 25th Amendment, arguing that a president who threatens civilian annihilation may well be manifesting the kind of incapacity that the amendment was designed to address. This isn't about policy disagreements. This is about whether the person with the nuclear codes is making decisions based on a sound mind. The NAACP has taken the extraordinary step of issuing a formal statement demanding 25th Amendment action. I want you to appreciate how significant this is. The NAACP is not a partisan political organization that weighs in on every legislative dispute. It's the nation's oldest and most respected civil rights organization, with an institutional history stretching back more than a century. For this organization to formally call for the removal of a sitting president is virtually unprecedented, and the language they used was devastating. They cited alarming signs of deteriorating health. They referenced increasingly delusional behavior. They called Trump unfit, unwell, and unhinged. These are not words chosen lightly by an organization that understands the weight its institutional voice carries. The NAACP looked at the available evidence, assessed the president's conduct, and concluded that the situation had become so serious that silence was no longer an option. The cumulative effect of these developments is what makes the current moment so constitutionally significant. You have legislation creating a presidential fitness commission. You have dozens of lawmakers publicly stating the president cannot safely serve. You have a major civil rights organization demanding his removal. You have specific presidential conduct, threats against civilians that provides concrete evidence for the concerns being raised. All of these elements are converging simultaneously, creating a constitutional accountability moment unlike anything in modern American history. The 25th Amendment has always existed as a theoretical safeguard. The Raskin bill, combined with the surrounding political dynamics, is pushing it toward operational reality. Now, I need to be completely honest with you about the political realities that constrain what this bill can actually achieve in the immediate term. The legislation faces a Republican-controlled Congress. Both the House and the Senate are in Republican hands. The leadership of both chambers has shown no appetite for mechanisms that could threaten a Republican president. The bill is unlikely to even receive a committee hearing, let alone a floor vote, under current political conditions. Analysts across the spectrum, from Time magazine to PBS, have noted that the path to passage is essentially non-existent in the current Congress. This is the political reality that supporters of the bill acknowledge openly, even beyond congressional dynamics. The 25th Amendment process itself requires buy-in from actors who are politically aligned with Trump. The vice president, who was chosen by Trump and ran on his ticket, would need to support the removal determination. The alternative pathway through the commission still ultimately requires the vice president's cooperation under the amendment's text. And if Trump contested the removal, as he certainly would, Congress would need a 2/3 vote in both chambers to keep the vice president in power. 2/3. That's a higher threshold than impeachment conviction. That requires massive bipartisan consensus. Given current political alignments, such consensus is almost impossible to imagine. The analysts are right. Immediate removal through this mechanism is improbable. The political math simply doesn't work. But here's what makes the bill significant despite these immediate obstacles. Major constitutional legislation doesn't always achieve its full effect the moment it's introduced. Sometimes the introduction itself is the achievement. The Raskin bill formalizes doubts about Trump's capacity in a concrete legislative form. It puts those doubts into the congressional record. It creates a documented institutional response that future historians will cite. It keeps the 25th Amendment in public discussion, in news headlines, in the political conversation. Every time Trump engages in conduct that raises fitness questions, commentators can point to this bill and say there's a mechanism sitting in Congress that could address this if lawmakers had the political will. The bill also lays a legal and institutional foundation that could prove crucial in a future crisis. Circumstances can change rapidly in politics. What seems impossible today might become necessary tomorrow. If Trump's conduct escalates in ways that finally break through the partisan defenses, if Republican lawmakers eventually reach their own breaking points, the Raskin bill provides a ready-made framework that could be activated quickly. The commission structure is already designed. The appointment process is already specified. The medical examination authority is already defined. In a genuine crisis, having this legislative groundwork in place could make the difference between chaos and orderly constitutional transition. This is institutional preparation for scenarios that no one wants to contemplate, but that responsible governance requires us to anticipate. There's also a broader constitutional significance that extends beyond Trump. The 25th Amendment has been part of the Constitution for decades, but its Section 4 removal mechanism has never been activated. The other body provision has never been utilized. By introducing this bill, Raskin and the co-sponsors are essentially completing the constitutional architecture. They're building the missing piece that the amendment's framers anticipated but never saw realized. This matters for future presidencies, for future situations where a president's fitness comes into question. The bill establishes a precedent for how Congress can exercise its 25th Amendment authority. It provides a template that future lawmakers can adapt and improve. Even if it doesn't pass now, it demonstrates what serious constitutional implementation looks like. The response from Trump's defenders is predictable and worth addressing honestly. They argue that the 25th Amendment should not be weaponized for political disagreements. They contend that lawmakers who oppose Trump's policies are using fitness concerns as a pretext for removal. They point out that civil rights organizations, however respected, have political perspectives that don't necessarily reflect neutral medical judgment. They insist that constitutional removal mechanisms should be reserved for genuinely incapacitated presidents, not presidents whose behavior is merely controversial or unconventional. These arguments deserve consideration. The 25th Amendment is indeed a serious constitutional tool that shouldn't be deployed lightly. Political opposition alone doesn't constitute incapacity. These are valid cautions that any responsible analysis must acknowledge. But the evidence supporting the fitness concerns in this case goes well beyond ordinary political disagreement. The Iran threats weren't just aggressive foreign policy rhetoric. They suggested a willingness to commit acts that would violate international law and potentially constitute war crimes. The language used about civilizations dying and annihilation went far beyond what any previous president has expressed publicly. The pattern of behavior that more than 80 lawmakers found alarming isn't based on a single offhand comment. It's based on sustained observation of a president whose communication and decision-making have consistently deviated from established norms in ways that raise legitimate questions about judgment and stability. When the NAACP, an organization that does not casually insert itself into partisan combat, uses words like delusional and unhinged, it's worth asking what they're seeing that prompted such extraordinary language. The bipartisan appointment mechanism in the bill further addresses concerns about political motivation. The commission wouldn't be a tool of one party. Its members would be selected by leaders from both sides of the aisle. Its medical professionals would base findings on clinical evidence, not political preferences. Its former executive branch officials would include people who served in administrations of both parties. The design explicitly anticipates the criticism that this is just another partisan attack and builds in structural safeguards against that possibility. If the commission were ever actually constituted, its findings would carry weight precisely because the process was designed to be fair. What we're witnessing right now is the American constitutional system engaging with one of its most profound challenges. The 25th Amendment exists precisely for moments when the normal political process can't address questions of presidential fitness. The cabinet mechanism has proven inadequate because political loyalty trumps institutional responsibility. The Raskin bill represents an attempt to build the alternative pathway that the Constitution's framers wisely included as a backup. Whether it succeeds in the immediate term, whether it ever gets used against this particular president, is almost secondary to the constitutional development development it represents. The bill formalizes concerns that have been building throughout this presidency. It creates a documented legislative response to observable presidential conduct. It keeps constitutional accountability mechanisms in the public conversation. And it prepares institutional groundwork for future scenarios that may require rapid activation. The stakes are genuinely historic. The United States has never removed a president through the 25th Amendment. No president has ever been declared unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office through the constitutional process. The mechanisms exist on paper but have never been tested in practice. The Raskin bill brings those mechanisms one step closer to operational reality. It moves the nuclear option for presidential incapacity from the realm of constitutional theory toward the realm of practical politics. And that movement, regardless of immediate legislative outcomes, represents a significant moment in the ongoing development of American constitutional governance. Future generations will look back at this period and see the introduction of this bill as one of the markers that defined how the Republic grappled with questions of presidential fitness in an era of maximum political stress. The bill may not become law this year. It may never be used against Trump. But its existence changes the conversation. It demonstrates that Congress is aware of its constitutional responsibilities. It shows that lawmakers are thinking seriously about the institutional tools available to them. And it ensures that the 25th Amendment remains a live option, not just a dusty provision in a textbook for addressing presidential incapacity when circumstances demand it. The coming months will determine whether this legislative effort gains additional momentum or stalls against the wall of partisan opposition. More lawmakers may sign on as co-sponsors. Additional organizations may add their voices to the call for constitutional accountability. Trump's own conduct will inevitably generate new controversies that either strengthen or weaken the case for the commission. The political dynamics could shift in ways that no one can currently predict. What's certain is that the bill has been introduced, the concerns have been formalized, and the constitutional conversation has moved forward in a way that cannot be undone. The path to removing a president from power through the 25th Amendment has never been fully built. The Raskin bill represents a significant step toward completing that construction, and whether or not it reaches its destination during this presidency, the act of building it will have lasting consequences for American constitutional governance.